Ghost Soldiers, a name whispered in awe. A mission many believed was impossible. In January 1945, deep in the mountains of northern Luzon in the Philippines, a small force of American Rangers prepared to walk straight into the heart of enemy territory. Their objective was not conquest, it was rescue. On January 30th, 1945, more than 500 American prisoners of war, survivors of the infamous Bataan Death March, were still alive, held behind barbed wire at Cabanatuan prison camp. They were starving, diseased, barely human shadows of the men who had once fought for the United States Army. Japanese forces were closing in. Orders had already been issued in other camps. Kill the prisoners before they can be liberated. If the Americans did not act now, the prisoners would die. This is the story of the mission that followed. A rescue carried out against impossible odds. A mission history would come to call the greatest rescue of World War II. To understand why Cabanatuan mattered, we must go back nearly 3 years earlier, to April 1942. After months of brutal fighting, U.S. and Filipino forces on the Bataan Peninsula were overwhelmed by the Imperial Japanese Army. More than 75,000 men surrendered. What followed became one of the darkest chapters in American military history, the Bataan Death March. Thousands died from execution, starvation, disease, and exhaustion. By 1945, only a fraction of those men were still alive. Cabanatuan Prison Camp No. 1, located near the town of Cabanatuan in Nueva Ecija province, held over 500 American POWs, many from the 31st Infantry Regiment, Philippine Scouts, and other U.S. Army units. The prisoners were skeletal. Average weight, under 90 pounds. Malaria, dysentery, and beriberi were rampant. Strategically, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. General Douglas MacArthur had returned to the Philippines in October 1944. By January 1945, U.S. 6th Army units were advancing south across Luzon. Japanese resistance was hardening, and so was their brutality. Captured documents revealed a chilling pattern. As American forces approached POW camps, Japanese guards executed prisoners en masse. Cabanatuan was directly in the path of the American advance. If the Rangers waited, there would be no one left to save. Little did the men assembling for the mission know, what they were about to attempt had never been done before. The mission was assigned to the 6th Ranger Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci. Mucci selected Company C, led by Captain Robert Prince, a calm, methodical officer known for his precision under pressure. Supporting them were elements of the Alamo Scouts, the U.S. Army's elite reconnaissance unit in the Pacific, and approximately 200 Filipino guerrillas under Captain Juan Pajota. The numbers were sobering. The Rangers could muster just 121 men. Cabanatuan was guarded by over 250 Japanese soldiers, including infantry, machine gun crews, and nearby reinforcements. Some estimates placed enemy strength in the area at more than 1,000 troops. The terrain offered no mercy. The camp sat in open farmland surrounded by rice paddies and flat ground. No cover, no darkness. A straight approach would be suicide. Worse still, just 800 yards from the camp was a major Japanese road, constantly used by enemy convoys. By 1400 hours on January 30th, Japanese troop movements increased. Trucks rolled past the camp. Guards were alert. The Rangers had one chance, one window, and no room for error. Captain Prince devised a daring plan, an assault at dusk, timed with a distraction so bold it bordered on madness. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, the men checked their weapons. M1 Garands, Thompson submachine guns, bars, grenades, bayonets fixed. Fear gripped the men, not fear of death, but fear of failure, because behind those fences were men who had already suffered enough. At 19:30 hours, the operation began. A lone P-61 Black Widow night fighter appeared overhead, flying dangerously low. Its engines roared across the camp again and again, drawing the attention of Japanese guards upward. It worked. As eyes followed the aircraft, the Rangers crawled forward through the fields, on their bellies, dragging weapons and wounded pride through the dirt for over an hour. They advanced silently. 200 yards, 150 yards, 100 yards. Then, disaster nearly struck. A Japanese sentry stood up. Another turned toward the field. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. At 1945 hours, Captain Prince gave the signal. The night exploded. Rangers rose from the ground and opened fire at point-blank range. Machine guns raked the guard towers. Grenades detonated inside barracks. Thompson fire cut down defenders before alarms could fully sound. Inside the camp, prisoners thought they were being executed. Men screamed. Some collapsed in terror. Others crawled into ditches, convinced the Japanese had come to finish the job. Captain Prince ran straight through the main gate, shouting, "We're American Rangers! You're free! Get down and follow us!" But many prisoners were too weak to walk. Some were blind, others delirious from fever. Meanwhile, Japanese reinforcements were already responding. From the east, enemy troops moved toward the sound of gunfire. Mortars began falling. Tracer rounds streaked across the darkness. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the Rangers would be trapped inside the camp with hundreds of helpless men. What happened next would become legendary.
This is where leadership and humanity changed everything. Rather than withdraw with only those who could move, Captain Prince made the decision they would take everyone. Rangers hoisted prisoners onto their backs. Filipino guerrillas brought caravel carts. Men who weighed barely more than children were carried through fire and smoke. At the perimeter, Lieutenant Richard King's platoon held off counterattacks, firing until barrels glowed red. One ranger later recalled, "I was carrying a man who hadn't stood up in 3 years. He kept apologizing for slowing me down." Japanese troops reached the camp perimeter just as the last prisoners were evacuated, but they were too late. Guerrillas under Captain Pajota ambushed enemy reinforcements at the Kabu Bridge, destroying trucks and delaying pursuit. Roadblocks erupted into firefights. For 3 brutal hours, the withdrawal continued, through fields, rivers, and jungle trails. Not a single prisoner was left behind. By dawn, the column reached American lines. Out of more than 500 POWs, every single one survived the rescue. Ranger casualties, 2 killed, 2 wounded. Japanese losses were estimated at over 500 killed, many during the pursuit and subsequent guerrilla actions. Against all odds, the impossible had been done. The rescue of Cabanatuan sent shockwaves through the Pacific Theater. For the first time since 1942, survivors of the Bataan Death March were free. Emaciated men wept openly as they were fed, treated, and reunited with comrades. Many did not live long after liberation, their bodies too damaged by years of abuse. But they died free. Captain Robert Prince received the Distinguished Service Cross. Lieutenant Colonel Mucci was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal. The Filipino guerrillas, long overlooked, were finally recognized for their decisive role. Strategically, the raid shattered Japanese confidence and saved hundreds of lives. But its deeper legacy was human. It proved that even in the darkest hours of war, compassion could drive courage. That soldiers would risk everything, not for territory, not for medals, but for their brothers. Decades later, survivors would describe the Rangers not as soldiers, but as ghosts, men who appeared out of nowhere, men who came when hope was already gone. Ghost soldiers. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to Past Horizon as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.